my personal philosophy is selling is for losers. And what I mean by that is we're not trying to sell something to somebody that they don't need, right? We're literally trying to solve a problem. So we're not trying to sell, we're trying to solve. And we're helping the most important people solve some of their biggest, most important problems. That's what sales is. Nothing more, nothing less.
Hey, it's great to have you back for another episode of the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast, where I feel indescribably called to help you become a leader that people love to follow. Today, you're going to be blessed beyond measure. I have with me an award-winning speaker, a world-renowned sales coach, believe it or not, the first Black president in private aviation in the United States of America. She's been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, Fast Company. She was even a keynote speaker at the Global Leadership Summit and is the author of the book Ally Leadership: Success Strategies to Lead People Who Are Not Like You in an Evolving Workplace. Today, we have Stephanie Chung. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. You know how to introduce a gal, by the way.
It is. It's a real honor. You know, I've been a fan since we met, and it seems like we became friends immediately.
Yes. I'm loving the friendship, actually.
I love your heart and your passion to lead, and I'm really excited for those in our community who may not yet know you to get to know you and to hear about your book. You're a world-class leader. You had massive success in changing cultures, in creating new financial streams of profit. I think from what I understand, at the heart of what you do is you're really, really good at sales.
Yes. I'd like to think so. Thank you very much.
Yes.
After hitting a couple of $1 billion over over a few years. So it's been really interesting because I started out in selling for the airlines, and then I eventually got recruited into selling for private aviation. So I always say when you're selling private jets, you're at the top of the food chain, if you will. So you have to get really specific on how do you sell, because you're not selling to the masses. You're selling to the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. Right?
And so when you were selling to the airlines, what were you selling then?
Actually, I was selling corporate travel. A lot of people don't realize that the airlines actually have a very large fleet, large sales team. And so you sell to corporations, you sell to once upon a time travel agencies as well. So usually you have either corporate sales or leisure sales, depending on what your market is. So yeah, I was corporate sales.
So to a lot of people who haven't done sales, it feels intimidating. Like, I'm not going to be good at sales. Was there a time early on where you recognized you were more naturally gifted or had the ability to learn quickly?
You know what's really interesting is when I started off working in the airlines at the ticket counter, parking planes, loading luggage, and checking customers in. And one of our heads of VP of sales, he actually is the one that noticed that I should be in sales because I was actually going on the operations route, right? And so one day he stopped and he's like, Steph, every time I come through this airport, I see you with a smile on your face, you're serving customers. I think we have you in the wrong position. I think you should be in sales. And I didn't know anything about sales, right? And so my very first job, I was like, okay, because I trusted him as a leader. And so I was 25 years old. My first job selling for the airlines, my quota was $25 million. And so I started off really, really rough because $25 million quota, not having sold a thing before in your life, it was a rough road. And I had a boss who wasn't what you and I would consider to be a great leader. She wasn't a developer of people. She was very clear. You got to get this $25 million in. If you don't do it, I'll just simply fire you and hire somebody else who can get it done. That was her development style, right? So when I first started, I was horrible. And so eventually I ended up having to figure out, how can I get this to make sense to me? Like, when do you use an open probe or a closed probe? Or when do you offer support? Like all the semantics of sales I didn't know. But eventually I, kind of moved everything around, took all the sales training that I'd ever gone through in my short little time at the airline and put it all on my kitchen floor, and then started to think, okay, well, if I do it this time, I do the open probe, and then that will set me up for the close, and how do I handle objections? And I started to make it make sense for me. And what was great about that is I eventually, I hit the quota the first year, and that's when I knew, because she was not helping me whatsoever. So I knew, like, okay, this you got this, girl. You can actually do this. And then from there, I've never missed a quota since. Only other time I ever missed a quota was September 11th.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And that makes a lot of sense, September 11th,
Yep.
in the airline industry. So there was a leader that worked with you that saw something in you and recognized you weren't maybe the right fit. Let's say you're working now with a bunch of leaders who are listening to this podcast, and you wanted to point out some qualities in them that they may not see in themselves that could be great qualities to be successful in sales. What would you be looking for if we had a room full of our community and we're talking right now? What is Stephanie, what are you zooming in on?
Easy question for me to answer because I've always had to lead sales teams, right? And so a lot of times what people don't realize when you're a sales leader, the average shelf life for a sales leader, like a head of sales, is usually about 2.5 years. Because it's one thing if you're like a CFO or, head of HR or whatever, those aren't driving revenue. But when you're head of sales, you're driving revenue. You are the top line. And so therefore, usually when you're head of sales, you come in and you end up taking over a team because the other, sales leader didn't perform. And so for me, I'm used to building teams and I have to build a team that's probably defunct at that point and get them to be able to perform. So the things that I always look for is one, and this is just my personal training in hiring, I always look for people who used to play college sports. So that's one, because they know how to win and they're about the team. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I'm also looking for, and also, by the way, sales is an individual sport, right? So I want people who can get away from the I and into the we, which is why if they played college sports, that's really helpful. You also have to know your leadership style. So my style of leadership is very direct, which is why I don't say high school sports, I say college sports, right? Because when you're in high school, you may have a coach that's been very direct, but everything changes when you now play sports in college because they're giving you your education for free. They're expecting you to help, fill those seats, and there's donors. And so there's a bigger responsibility and it's a job at that point, right? So when I look at people who have the potential to be good sellers, I want to make sure that they know how to, one, function in a team and that they can learn and that they understand that at the end of the day, the team has to win, right? Like, again, I'm not a person who loses and misses quotas. So when you're on my team, the expectation is really clear. You must hit the goal, right? Plus, my background, I'm a child of a soldier, right? So my father drilled in my head, you always must complete the mission, right? So anyway, so those are some of the things I look for. And then the other, probably one of the most important pieces is what's their how resilient are they? What's their adaptability? Can they get back up if they get knocked down? That's really key because in sales, you're going to get rejected all the time. And so you have to be able to have that type of attitude that you're not going to go off in the corner and lick your wounds forever. You're just like, all right, let me go on to the next one, right? So it's so much of a head game in sales, which people love to hate salespeople, because a lot of times we don't really understand them, but they are the most amazing people. It's the most amazing career as far as I'm concerned. It's a very noble career. And when you're really good at it, you can, there's no commission cap, so you can make more than the president of the United States and not have half his problems, right?
Right. So that's fascinating. I had talked to one other CEO that at the top of the list of things that he looked for was college athletes. Yeah. And I played college sports. And so I always thought of it too, not just that they know how to win, but they also know how to get coached.
Yes. That's good. That's good.
So when I'm working with someone who was an athlete, I don't hold back because I know they've been used to being coached. So let's say that someone didn't play college sports and let's say they don't really know their leadership style and let's say they're not real resilient. Is there any hope for them?
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. There's hope for all of us, right? But what I would say is, because I'll reverse that question a little bit. A lot of times when you're talking to new entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, and they'll say, I'm just not good at sales. And at that point, I'm always really clear. You had better get good at sales or else go work for somebody else. Like, don't try to do this your own, because selling is what we do as entrepreneurs, right? And actually in life in general, you're always selling something, even if you're just trying to sell your kids on eating broccoli. So sales is a foundation of what it is that we do. But what I really want people to always understand is their impression of sales has usually been a negative one. And that's why people kind of pull away from the thought of being a salesperson. But when sales is done right, because my personal philosophy is selling is for losers. And what I mean by that is we're not trying to sell something to somebody that they don't need, right? We're literally trying to solve a problem. So we're not trying to sell, we're trying to solve. And we're helping the most important people solve some of their biggest, most important problems. That's what sales is. Nothing more, nothing less. And so when you go into it with that type of attitude, then it takes the stigma off of like, oh, I have to be a certain way. I've seen people who are not. Once upon a time, people would say, oh, that person has the gift of gab and therefore they'd be great in sales. And it's like, usually they're not going to be great in sales because they don't know how to stop and ask questions to figure out what it is that the person actually needs. So I would tell everybody, anybody, you're selling all day, every day. You just have to change your perspective of how you see it.
So what you said is so important. I want to slow it down and I'm going to kind of make a comment. Then I'm going to ask you to say it again because I can imagine people, they're listening at 1.5 speed. They don't realize like this is 1.0 speed quality.
Yeah, thank
right?
you.
Okay. So it made me think about a book that I read that talked about good business is actually loving people. That if you create a product or a service that someone needs or loves, then you're actually loving and serving them by creating that valuable product. Then if they give you the money for it, that shows just how much they like it. If you do that enough times, if you help more people and love more people, you create more profit. If you create more profit, then you need to hire employees. And so you're actually serving and loving people by creating jobs for people. And so good business is loving and serving. Selling, you said, is for what was it? Your quote? You said
selling's for losers.
For losers. So I want you to say it again, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Help me understand why this is something that's valuable.
Okay. So selling is for losers. The reason why I say that is because a lot of times we've been brought up and we all have a picture of the used car salesperson, right? So you walk on the lot, you barely get on the lot and they're like, you like that car? Do you like that car? Do you want that car? You want that car? You want to take the car for a dress drive? And you're like, okay, I just walked on the lot. Like, give me a second.
We want to sell to benefit ourselves.
100%. And so when you think about selling, especially when you're selling at a high level, right? For me on the private jet side, I'm selling to the movers and shakers of the world's economy. Money's not the issue. They have the money, right? And so what you're trying to do is to figure out, well, what is it that's going to actually resonate with them most? And what's going to resonate with them most, and this is true for anybody, is that you have to understand what it is that they really need. And though that sounds simple, you'd be surprised how many people don't really care what you need. What they care about is they're trying to hit their quota. And so that's why most people have been put in that predicament where they feel like someone, and we all know the insincere, right? When we know when someone's trying to sell us something, not because they care about us, but because they want to, they're just focused on their own needs. And when that happens, we get almost like a yucky feeling, right? Because a lot of times their questions are also, what we consider to be closed probes, right? So open probe, I ask a question and it requires you to give me a long answer. Closed probe, I ask a question, it requires only a yes or no answer. And so a lot of people who are not really trained in how to sell will focus in on just closed probe questions, which makes people start to feel like you're putting them on the defense, right? And they feel like they're getting backed into a corner. And so that's the experience. When most people think of sales, they usually think of that type of experience because they remember how it made them feel. Now let's reverse it. Go back to your point, which when I say selling is for losers, people should remember how you made them feel, but not because they felt awful in the process, but because they felt like, man, that Craig, he understood what I needed. He listened, he asked questions. And therefore, when you focus and you look at sales that way, right? Because then it's gonna open you up more, which then you'll tell me what I need to know. And then together we can figure out if my product or service is going to be the best one for you.
So can you put some language around what else are we offering besides the product or the service? For example, right out of college, I felt called into ministry, but nobody was calling. And so I used my business degree. I went into sales. I sold for Honeywell security systems. And during the interview, they said, so tell us what are we going to be selling? And I said, well, this will be relatively easy because, I'm 23 years old, because we'll be selling an alarm system. And they said, no, actually, we're not selling an alarm system. We're selling a feeling of security. And that was like lesson number one in my interview process. And I recognized that you're actually offering intangibles. Can you tell me what are some of the most important intangibles you're offering as you're solving other people's problems?
Yeah, usually time, right? So I'll give you a very specific example, and we'll focus in on the private jet side. I've never sold private jets. And truth be told, nobody really needs a private jet. Like, I could say that now, right? Now that I'm not selling them anymore. But I say that because at the end of the day, you can fly, pretty much anywhere on a commercial airline and still get there. The planes are going to fly about the same amount of time and distance and whatnot. So you don't need a private jet. The reason why people buy private jets and they fly privately is because their time is worth so much, right? And so therefore, what I'm selling is not the jet, I'm selling their time. I'm selling time to get back home to be able to make your daughter's soccer game. I'm selling you time to be able to have dinner with the family. That's what I'm actually selling you. So when you think about your average person, like, me and you, right? What we care about most is the thing money can't pay for, which is time. And so usually when you think about all the products that you're selling, time is going to be the most important. Safety and security is going to be really important. And then, depending on the product that you sell, it could also be a feeling of prestige, let's say, for an example, right? And that could be why somebody buys, I'm going to use this as an example. I'll give you a very specific example. When I used to sell Learjets. So with Learjets, people, it's a jet, but there's other jets as well. And so what I would always tell a customer is, listen, you can either, Learjets, think of it this way. You can either get from point A to point B in a Ferrari, or you can get there in a Chevy Impala. Both are going to get you there. One's just going to get you there in a different style, right? So now you're selling to that feeling of they're like, well, who wants to ride in a Chevy Impala? Nothing wrong with Chevys. Shout out, right? But you're always looking for what is it that emotion that's going to get them to engage. Yep. And at the end of the day, sales is truly, people always make the decision to buy based on their emotion. And then they get all the numbers and the data and the facts to back up the logic. But it's truly an emotional decision at first.
So we have a lot of people listening that are in ministries and nonprofits. Would a person like that ever be in sales? And if so, I'm baiting you. Would they ever be in sales?
Yeah, absolutely. Because talk about the ultimate feeling. Right now, you're talking about feelings on a whole different level at that point, right? So if you think of I'm on the Make-A-Wish board, we'll use that, and you're fundraising all the time because at the end of the day, you're trying to help some really special kids who are having a special battle, right? And you want to put a smile on their face. That requires selling. That requires you to talk to someone that they don't know these kids, right? But you want to have it, and you're just you're putting out the emotion, if you will, that they can then go, oh yeah, I'm going to cut a check for that, even though I don't know this child, but I can feel, right, what that my money will do or how it will help, et cetera. So all of us are really, at the end of the day, when I go back to selling is for losers, it's because you're not focused on the emotion of the buyer. And at the end of the day, if you can focus in on what's the emotion of the buyer, what is it that's driving them, you will be successful in sales, whether you hold the title of sales or not.
So I've heard other business leaders say, everyone should be in sales if possible at some point. Agree or disagree? 100%.
I go one step further. Everybody should do a commission-only sales job, right? Because that's going to, when you're the only person that, you don't eat or you don't make money, 100% commission
changes your mindset about everything, right?
Everything.
If you're entitled in that role, you can't be for long.
That's right. Exactly. It is fantastic. So when I used to hire, I would love when somebody told me that they maybe ran their own business, and even if it failed, that's okay because I know what they've learned is going to be priceless. Or if they worked a job that was 100% sales commission, love it. All that is good. I will tell you, like we're talking about sales, but even as a leader, many, 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 many years ago when I first had my baby, I ended up selling Mary Kay Cosmetics. It's 100%, commission only, right? And loved the job, and here's why. Not only did I sell, and I made some record. I think I won my first car 5 weeks in, right? Because I knew how to sell. But what I like about it from a leadership perspective is I couldn't fire the team. And so it forced me to have to learn how to be a leader. And more importantly, a leader that they controlled my paycheck, right? When you look at those kind of multi-marketing things, it's all about how do those people, sell. So I had to make sure I developed them, I trained them, they knew how to sell because they, at the end of the day, were controlling my paycheck. So that teaches you how to lead at a different level because now all of a sudden you're leading people, and I really do care about your development.
So how specifically would some of those skills convert directly into leadership skill?
The which part of it?
So if you're selling, and then so you went from sales to leading tons and tons of people. When were you selling in leadership? And what's different in leadership that's not selling? When is leadership selling and when is it not selling?
That's a great question, by the way. So when I think about leadership, right, a lot of times we as leaders, we tell, then we sell, then we yell. Okay, so we tell you, well, let's do this. If we don't feel like you're picking up what we're laying down, then we start to sell you on it. Well, here's what you want to do and here's why. And then if you're still not getting it, though we may not physically yell, our body language is starting to stiffen up and now we're like becoming annoyed. Tell, sell, yell. Typical leadership style, right? When you think about sales, really what leadership should be is being able to get the team engaged. So you're selling them on, like I'll give you an example as a sales leader. The beginning of the year, here's my quota, here's what the company's looking for us to do as an organization, as a sales team. So at that point, I'm pulling the team together. Hey guys, listen, here's the number, right? And I'm not going to be the typical leader who's going to go, and here's how we're going to do it, because I need them engaged. It's their number too. And I really want to, A, develop them so that they can strategically think. But then B, I want them to create the plan. So it's not my plan, it's your plan, right? My job is just to make sure we get the job done. And so the very best thing that a leader can do is to literally lay it out on the whiteboard. Hey guys, here's what's going on. And then say, I could really use your help on how we're going to get that accomplished.
You want them to own it.
You want them to own it.
And believe in it.
And believe in it. And then more importantly, usually they have the answer, right? We leaders don't always have the answer. And so one of the biggest things that we can do as leaders is to learn the fact that we rarely have the answer, or if we do, it's probably not the best answer, right? You want to use the collective voices and mindset of the team, and they're closest to it. So they usually will come to the table with a much better plan than you would have done, sitting in the ivory tower kind of coming up with it. So yeah, pulling the team in on the front end is really good. But what you do, so I go back to that quota, is as a leader, I've got to sell the quota, right? Because naturally people are going to go, that's 20% more than we had to do last year and blah, blah, blah. Right. So you're selling as to, okay, but here's why, and here's what we're going to do with it, and here's what it's looking like, and here's how we're going to, impact the world or what have you.
So that transfers really well into every form of leadership, which is, here's the vision, here's what we want to accomplish, and you cast the vision, in a sense you're selling it, and then you're inviting great people to come alongside and say, hey, how can we accomplish this? Then you're trusting and empowering them along the way.
Yes.
Now, this sounds relatively easy. You were working at the front desk, and then you made a $25 million quota, and then you're running the company, and I know along the way that there were a million things that were not easy. Can you tell me what would be one or two of the obstacles that felt insurmountable that you had to overcome?
Yeah. And it's funny because that's actually a big part of the book, right? When we talk about leading people that are not like you. So for me, when I first got into private aviation, a lot of times people who sell private aviation on planes, they're pilots, or they used to be in the military, or, maybe they have a mechanical background or what have you. None of those things do I have, okay? So I was a military brat, but I was never in the military. And I certainly I always tell people, when it comes to planes, I don't fix them, I don't fly them, right? I don't know how to fly the plane, I don't know how to fix a plane. So now all of a sudden you're inheriting a team and they're all, looking at me like she's not a pilot, or she's not, doesn't know how, she didn't shoot down something in the middle of, somewhere, right? So that then becomes okay, how am I going to get them to respect, and how am I going to get their respect, and how are we going to still function as a team? Right? So that was probably one of the bigger hurdles first coming into it, because there's not a lot of women in private aviation. There's certainly not a lot of women of color. And at the time, I was literally the only one, right? And so, inheriting teams, and all of a sudden you have to do big things with these teams, and not having the same background in any shape, form, or fashion as the people that I was leading, that was usually an area that I needed to grow, they needed to grow. Thankfully, it always worked out real well. I earned their respect. They earned mine, et cetera. But that was one. The other things, just sometimes being a woman in a male-dominated space, because that is, we don't have enough time for all those stories, right? But, there's always little things that whether it's microaggressions that you're just trying to deal with and still get the job done and still keep a good attitude. And, sometimes people don't even realize the stuff that they're saying is truly ignorant. And so you're trying not to let it affect you as you're just staying focused on the goal. Yeah.
So we talked about your book, and in the writing process, I was really honored you called, and I'm the guy that has the questions. You're the expert, but we talked about what are some of the things I'm facing, and you said something just kind of in passing. You said, I earned their respect and they earned mine. Can you Talk about how. So you're a woman of color in a industry that does not have that, and you have no experience. What did you do to earn the respect?
Yeah, and I have an acronym for it, which is when I think of the word ally, so ALLY, is ask, listen, learn, and then you take action, right? So ask, listen, learn, you take action. And the biggest thing, I would say the biggest benefit that I had is growing up a military kid. I moved around every 2 years of my life. So I was always the new kid. I always had to adapt to the new situation, new school, new teacher, new everything. Fast forward, you become a leader and adaptability is in my DNA. But one of the biggest benefits is the fact that I've always been able to connect with people because I had no choice, right? Growing up as a little kid. So every team I've ever had, whether they were like me or usually not like me at all, is I spent time connecting with them just as a human being. It wasn't the fact that they're Joe Blow and they work for me. It's like, no, he is somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's son, somebody's best friend. That's how I really want to get to know him. And then once I'm able to do that, he can see my sincerity, right? Because I truly am trying to understand him as a person. Then the guards start to come down, and on both sides, right? And then all of a sudden we can realize that we've got more in common than we do not. And now we can get to the same beat of the same drummer, right? We can walk in sync, if you will. But the biggest success that I've always had is really, truly, I truly can tell you, everybody I've ever led, I truly loved them, right? And even the ones that maybe it didn't work out and I needed to move them into a different position, I always saw them as they are somebody's son, mother, daughter, best friend. That is literally how I've always approached them. And so because of that, they deserved my best, right? Which was to make sure that they were trained and developed, make sure that I got them ready for their next level. Hopefully it was within our organization. Sometimes it's not, right? And then you move them on to, they go on and somebody recruits them, one of your competitors usually.
So was that intuitive or was that learned?
I would, it's a good question. I would say it's intuitive, but I also remember when I first got my very first leadership position, I remember asking my dad. Now, my dad was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. And I said to him, Dad, they just promoted me. I really want to do a good job. What advice would you give me? And he told me two things that I still live with till this day, which is one, always protect your team. And the second one was, no, there's two sides to every story. Those are his two pieces of advice. Wow. So fast forward, always protect your team. I'll tell you a funny story. One time I had a salesperson who, my rule for the team was, hey, before you send out a proposal, if one of your sales support people have done the proposal for you, you have to look at it first before it goes out. Because when you're dealing with private jets, that decimal point in the wrong number, wrong side becomes huge, right? This particular day, the gentleman had to catch a flight. He didn't double check his person's proposal, and it was going to cost us $325,000. Wow. It was a $325,000 mistake. Wow. And the customer was holding our feet to the fire, right? And so I remember, once word spread, and I get called into the CEO's office, who I report into, and he was livid, which I don't blame him. And he's just screaming, he's going off, and because I could see the veins in his neck, and he's turning beet red. And I remember he said to me, "Who did this?" Because he wanted a name, and I was like, I did this. As far as you're concerned, I did it. Stephanie, you don't do it. That was made him madder, by the way. It wasn't like, it was like some heroic story. He actually got madder when I made that comment. He said, you don't write proposals. I know you didn't do this. And I was like, but my team, we have a process. And that process wasn't followed. So as far as you're concerned, I did it, right? And so I never gave up the name. And I say that because I remember my father saying, always protect your team. And so now, of course, I'm going to handle it on the opposite end, right, with the teammate. But, that's when it's easy to say that you're protecting your team or you're all, supportive of your team or you're an ally or any of that stuff. That stuff's easy to say. But people nowadays especially want to see receipts. And so that for me was an example of I could have easily, he had it coming to him, right, a $325,000 mistake. But that wasn't the point. The point was the leader always protects the team.
That's really a good lesson. And you talk about creating loyalty when you do that. So the book is called Ally Leadership, Success Strategies to Lead People Who Are Not Like You in an Evolving Workplace. How important is it in our workplace to have people that are not like us?
Yes. Well, if you think about how the world's changing these days, this is why it was like so prompted to write the book. We've got 5 generations working right now, which is unheard of. We've never had that in history.
Right.
So their ages are from 16 to 75, right? And they all have different perspectives, different expectations, different everything. So that's issue number 1. So we've got all the generations. Second part is women are now the majority of the world population. They're no longer the minority. So that changes the dynamics. You've got the Black, Asian, and Hispanic race continuing to grow. White race is shrinking. That changes the dynamics. So the leader of today is very different than the leader of, 2020, right? Or 2019. And the leader of today is going to be very different than the leader of 2025, 2030. So what that basically means is no matter who you are, this isn't a black and white thing or a male or female or young or old. It is an everybody thing. No matter who you are, you will lead people who are not like you. So how do you do it? And that's the biggest focus for me, is because it's not like you can't put your head down and go, well, I'm not going to do it. Well, those aren't the options, right? The option is world's changing, get on board, right? And so how you're going to approach that is really ask, listen, learn, and then you take action. As it's one thing to be an ally, it's a different thing when you're an ally leader, because leadership has a different demand on us, right? And so you have to be able to lead all of God's kids, every race, every creed, every gender. That's the world we live in. It isn't like, well, I don't really relate to you, so, or I'm only going to hire people that look like me. None of that stuff works anymore.
Right.
You're going to have to step up or get left behind. Those are your options, really.
So if you're working with people and they're not doing it well, what are some of the biggest, most obvious mistakes that stand out early in a process?
Yeah, the biggest one I would say is you've got to put yourself in other people's shoes. I personally think empathy is the new form of leadership. You really have to understand the other person. And how that happens is by asking, listening, and learning. Don't assume that you know, right? And so the minute you can start to really just ask questions, listen. Don't listen with like, oh, I'm going to respond. Listen with, I didn't realize that. That's really good to know. So once you do that, you're going to learn new things about, these folks that you're now leading. And that will then take care of itself. I never want people to feel like this is this big, complex issue. I think really a lot of times people start getting nervous because they think I'm going to be canceled. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to look like a racist, right? Like all of that stuff then makes them not say anything, right? So I want to actually give people grace. Everybody needs to just throttle it back a little bit, right? Let's not be so quick to cancel each other or throw each other on the bus. Let's give each other grace and just understand that none of us are the same. I mean, that's what's really cool, right? But then you have to go into with an attitude of, how am I going to get to know you as much as I possibly can?
So I'm going to get real practical. Let's say we're getting to know each other and I am hearing your story and I'm realizing, well, it is different from mine. And we do have a lot of things that are in common. What if we fundamentally still disagree? What do we do?
Yes, and that's okay. That's okay to disagree, right? Because that actually makes it healthy. Because you're going to disagree, and I may listen to your thought process and think, I never thought of it that way. And now maybe I start to agree, right? Or I just go, I thought of it that way. I just don't agree with you. And there's nothing wrong with that. See, when we disagree with each other, it doesn't have to be, right now, it just seems like we go crazy, right? We disagree. People they don't know how to have healthy confrontation. One thing I will say as a leadership as well, as part of leadership, is you almost want to start instilling healthy confrontation into your team. So getting them in a place where they're always uncomfortable. One of the best CEOs that I ever had, he specialized in that. He would like throw some kind of grenade in there, get us all worked up, and then he'd leave, right? And now we've got to figure out how to clean it up. It was the best thing ever because it forced the team to start functioning like one team. One of the biggest scoldings I ever had as a new leader coming up in the ranks was by the same CEO, by the way. I remember being at getting a cup of coffee. He and I were both in the cafe. And he said to me, Steph, now I was the head of sales. He said to me, he goes, what's going on with the pilots? Are the pilots, how many called in sick today? I don't know. So I remember saying to him, I was like, well, I don't know. I can go ask operations. And he read me the riot act. And he says, what do you mean you don't know? If there's no pilots flying, isn't that going to disrupt our, on-time performance or how many planes are being dispersed? Aren't you the head of sales? Isn't that going to impact customer experience? And he went on and on and on. And what he was doing was trying to make me realize, like, No, you do need to care. You're not responsible for, all of those, data points, but you still need to know I'm a leader in the company. And I will never forget that, because that changes how I lead as well. I expect my team to know everything that's going on in the business. A lot of times when you look at like a sales leader or a sales teams know their quota. Okay, well, I expect you to know your quota, but they may not necessarily know what business are we really in. And so as a sales leader, I refuse to have an ignorant sales team. And so therefore, you're going to sit down with finance. You're going to sit down with every single division in this company, and we're going to do walk a miles so that everybody understands how the business works. Because then we're going to all win together, or we're going to all lose together, right? Those are the only options that we've got. And so when you force people to have to truly understand and be each other's keeper, then all of a sudden you've got a team that's unstoppable, right? And especially if you tie their bonuses and all that stuff together as well. So it's important that when you're looking at people who are not like you, it's what can I do to find that commonality? And if I can't, and we're going to disagree, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You just have to still always be respectful, because you are each other's keeper.
So I'm going to ask a complicated question. So look, we have age diversity, and a boomer is going to think a lot different, in a million different ways than a Gen Z, Gen Y. We're going to have racial diversity. We're going to have gender diversity. It's almost like we have pockets of what I might call value diversity.
Yeah.
From everything to like, we're going to work really, really hard here, and we're going to bring our best all the time, to, you know what, I don't really like to work a whole lot, and I don't like you telling me how to work. To, you got to earn your right here, or I deserve it. I'm, in almost an entitled spirit. Yeah. How do you bridge those gaps?
Yeah. You know what? I've had teams like that before, a lot actually. And the key is, how I've always done it, honestly, is let them work however they work. Like, I don't care, right? I need this done. And so whether you're going to work from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. and still get it done, fine with me, right? If you prefer to work 8 a.m. to 5 a.m., that's great. So what I think we leaders are going to have to do, especially during this time of like trying to be that ally, is everybody's different. It's not them that has to change. It's us that has to change and go, and that's okay. As long as I can still get the task done, that's all I care about. And so for me, I know, it's funny because I had a salesperson tell me this recently. He used to report to me many, many years ago. And he said, Steph, one of the things I always appreciate about you is he says, I would make them do this report. He hated it. And he goes, and I remember one day you're like, listen, I know you don't like doing the report. And instead of us going back and forth every single week that, it needs to get done, here's what I need so that I can deliver it to my executives. However you can get me that, fine with me. And that was the key for him. He was like, and then now he doesn't have to do the report. He just needs to get me the information that I need. And I believe with leaders, we have to be okay with not always being right, and you have to do it my way and all that stuff, right? You've got to let that go because different season, And
the bigger you want to grow or to be more effective, I call it tolerating things outside your preferences. Yeah. There are so many things that happen here that I just don't love. Yeah. And a lot of times what they're doing is actually better than what I love because they're just different. And there are people that have really different values, different approaches, different work styles. But if they're contributing to the mission, not just tolerate it, but sometimes celebrate it. Like that was really different. I didn't really like it at first, but you actually crushed it. Right. I want to ask one more question, then I want to talk about your book. When someone's crushing it, when someone's struggling, and whatever it is, you're coming in and you're going to motivate them. What does that look like?
What, for the team or for the individual?
Let's say you got a team and you're motivating and or celebrating. How do you motivate them towards something? How do you celebrate their wins?
Oh, I love that. So one, I'll give you an example of whenever I take over a team, right? Because there's certain things that I always do. So the first thing I always do is I have a team meeting, and the message of that meeting is, I expect you to be your brother's keeper. That's really the message. And again, usually sales is an individual sport, so I have to kind of set the ground rules that we're a team, and there's not going to be one superhero on this team. We're either all going to win or we're all going to lose. So that's the very first thing, is I try to build that community on the front end so that they know my expectation. The second thing that we talk, so there's teamwork on the front end. Then we're going to talk about, goals, right? Because we've got it. What's the vision? What are we trying to get accomplished? All that's really important. But the reason why that's important is because I'm expecting them to hit their goals, et cetera. So we're going to be in a spirit of celebration all the time. I always want everybody to have a lot of fun. They're going to spend more time together than they will with their family. So how do we celebrate that? For me, when you're trying to lead a successful team, I kind of use the acronym EARN, right? Which is I'm going to set the environment. So you are your brother's keeper. I'm going to make sure we're in alignment. Here's what the vision is. Here's what we got to get to. Then I'm also going to, rally the troops behind a cause. And I'll come back to that in a second because that answers your question. And then the third one is then I'm going to navigate. And navigate is just planning. How do we adjust it? How do we, you're a pilot. So navigation is all about planning and the direction. But going back to the R, rallying the troops, that's when the celebration comes in. What I have found is when you can get them focused on the competitor, again, I'm usually working with sales teams, so they're competitive in nature, but get them rallied around the one cause, because if they're former athletes who know how to win and they're a team, they're going to get that whole, motivation going, if you will. So I'll give you an example. And I remember going to visit one of my cousins who was at West Point. And when you're on campus, they're like, beat Navy. That's all they say, right? So that's one of those ways that you can rally the troops. And all of a sudden, people are really focused on that one thing. We had a competitor who I won't mention now, but we would walk around our, building and like, beat so-and-so, right? So I love getting them focused on, this is what we're focused on, this is what we're going to win. Because, and then there are times that I may have the team do something fun against each other, separate, East Coast versus West Coast or whatever. But rallying the troops around, because we've got the environment, we're each other's keeper, we're doing all this stuff, we're in alignment, we know the vision, now let's have some fun with it. That's such an important part that I think sometimes we leaders are running around so much that we just don't think about that. But fun is the name of the game, right? I want my team to have fun. My whole job as a leader is to make sure that they are the best, right? Like I've equipped them, they're really, really good, and that they're so good that all of my competitors are constantly coming to recruit them. But they choose to go nowhere because they love the environment that they're in. They get the training, they're having fun, they are working with their brother's keeper. You know what I mean? So you create the environment that people can't take your people, but they're good enough that, everybody wants them.
Exactly. And so fun is the byproduct of winning in the environment. So sometimes I've seen groups say, we want to have fun here, so we're going to go ride go-karts. Like, that's not creating fun. Right. What it is actually winning with people that you love. And so in summary, a few of the things that stood out to me, and you're brilliant. And first of all, I just want to say that what I love about what you're saying is that this is how you live and how you lead, and that when you're selling, you're not selling a product, but you're actually meeting a need and you're caring for people. You're going to be others focused in every way. To be an ally to someone, you want to know their story, hear their background, walk in their shoes, and genuinely care about where they've come from. And you want to, and you've said it over and over again, you want to be your brother's keeper. You want to protect your team no matter what. You use the word team over and over and over and over again. And when you say team, some people say it's just kind of like a throwaway word, but it's you win together and you lose together. Even you dropped a million little things like tie our bonuses together. So we're winning together as a team. We know the vision. We're going to ask. We're others focused. We're going to listen. We're going to learn, and then you do something about it. And those are just really valuable insight that I think that people can take with them. They're going to want to learn more about you. People are going to go, where do I find out more? And so tell me where they can find out more, and then how can they get Ally Leadership? Sure.
So you can find me at stephaniechung.com or any of the social handles. It's all the Stephanie Chung. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. In regards to the book, we're actually pre-selling signed copies now, and you can go and get that stephaniechung.com/book. You can also get it through stephaniechung.com. So that's how you find me. I'm out there.
Well, I appreciate who you are, and I appreciate the way you lead, and I know that your book is going to be super helpful because this is, if we're not good at leading those different from us, we're not going to be good at leading at all.
Exactly.
Today. And your heart and your love for people shines through in all that you do. And so it's been an honor to have you on. And I want to say to our community, be sure and find out more about Stephanie, stephaniechung.com. And then if this is helpful to you, please share on social media, tag Stephanie, tag me, and our teams may share your post to help bring others into the community. You're also going to want to get the leader guide. In the guide, we've got additional discussion questions and more information about Stephanie, how you can get to know her as well. But that's super valuable information for you. And guess what happened today? You got a little bit better. And I want to encourage you to keep getting better, because we know that everyone wins when the leader gets better.